Meeting of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee to order and start with attendance. I am Matt McGrath. I am here. John.
Hey, I'm John Day. I'm here.
Nancy.
I'm Nancy Hagerman. I'm here.
Tahani. No Tahani. Alexis.
Here.
Jody.
Martin, does this mean you have a quorum?
You have a quorum, yes.
Then I think I'm not doing well, and I wouldn't even trust my opinion. I'm doing so badly today, but take it away, guys. So have a great day.
All right. Sorry to hear that, Jody. Thanks for joining for a minute. Hope you feel better.
Thanks.
And Ron is also not present. So we will move through the agenda. Announcements. Any announcements from members of the committee? I will make one. First of all, I'll apologize for not being here last time, but I was camping up on the North Kaibab, which was awesome. So it's a kind of a pseudo apology that I don't really mean. But then I also am going to have to hop off today around 5:45. We have very boring fire well north of the peaks, no danger to the city, but we have some regularly scheduled meetings that I need to attend in the evening. So I apologize for that. For about 5:45, I'll have to jump off, and if we're still going, I'll ask Martin to bring us home. Any other committee members with announcements? No. Martin, any staff announcements?
None for me. I will note that City Engineer Paul Mood has joined the meeting. And if his son Oliver is listening, hi, Oliver.
I haven't left to pick him up yet, Martin, sorry.
Oh, okay, all right.
Usually I pick up my son I have to pick up my son after work, and on Thursdays, my son is listening to bicycle or pedestrian committee meetings.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Paul. We appreciate it. Approval of minutes. Martin, the minutes we're running a little bit behind, have not released those yet, so we will revisit those at a future meeting. And then if we can move on to old business, Flagstaff Regional Plan 2045 update from city staff.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Jordan, who are in the city's comprehensive planning section. Do you want to, I've got the PowerPoint. Do you want to sit by the computer? Okay.
Yeah, you want to sit by the computer and just and forward it? So I guess I'll start out. I'm Jordan Hollinger. I'm the associate planner with the city's comprehensive planning team. So this is an opportunity that we're giving to our intern, Joe O'Connell, to help us do a presentation with you all. So this is just an opportunity to update the committee on where we're at with the Flagstaff Regional Plan update and what we've been doing over the last year, because I think it's been about a year since we were here last. Take it away, Joe.
I'm Joe. I'm interning with the Comprehensive Planning Program. And since I've been here, I've had the opportunity to help the team with the current regional plan update, which is going from the regional plan 2030 to our regional plan 2045. I think about a year ago, the team was here and did a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis with a focus on the Flagstaff region. And from that, we've been able to take some of that information that we got and hold a multitude of other different public engagement activities. And right now, we're at a very exciting point in the update process. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of share where we are and where we're going. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about what the regional plan is and how it pertains to Flagstaff and the Flagstaff region. The regional plan is part of a hierarchy of different planning documents, with the regional plan sort of providing a vision and a direction for the Flagstaff region in terms of how we use our land, among many other different goals. Below that, you have specific plans and area plans, which sort of take that vision that the regional plan provides and gives it a more refinement in terms of how we use our land in very specific areas, as well as how we use resources like parks, recreation, utilities, those sorts of things. From there, you have implementation. So things like the zoning code, housing regulations, engineering standards, the annual budget all serve as implementation mechanisms to sort of make sure that that vision that we've created through regional plans as a community and specific plans is being realized. So why is it a regional plan? In terms of the city of Flagstaff, it serves as a general plan. It must be ratified every 10 years by voters, and it supports land use decisions, policymaking, as well as assists with things like 100-year water supplies, transportation planning, among other things. In terms of Coconino County, it includes some of the unincorporated communities around Flagstaff, and it serves as an amendment to the Coconino County Comprehensive Plan. It is not ratified by voters, but it must be adopted by the Board of Supervisors as a major amendment to the comprehensive plan. It provides a map of the area and place types that is further refined by area plans that are like those specific plans that the city has, more refined than the comprehensive plan itself. Early on in the update process, the development of the plan was broken into 4 distinct phases, with the first phase being get curious and gain understanding. So when we came by about a year ago and conducted our strength, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats analysis, that was part of that phase 1, which was focused on gaining background information, preparing preliminary materials, collecting basic preliminary data, as well as just generating excitement, interest, and overall awareness that the regional plan update is happening. In the fall, we began phase 2 of the regional plan update, which was the vision process. It began with a series of visioning workshops, which we'll touch on briefly later in the presentation, as well as the main focus of our presentation today, which is scenario planning. And that's sort of acknowledging that the future is uncertain. 2045 is a long way away. And it's a strategy that we use to potentially prepare for a number of different uncertainties. Then finally, with the writing of the plan around the corner, we will briefly touch on phase 3, which is writing the plan and what that might look like and what you can expect. So as I previously stated, visioning workshops were conducted in the fall of 2022, I believe. But it was sort of focused on engaging with the public and developing different community values and giving people an opportunity to voice their values for the community, as well as concerns and sort of what they were thinking about when they think about what's going on in the Flagstaff region through 2045 and beyond. For these visioning workshops, we focused on the focal question to think about where and how you live, work, and play in the Flagstaff region, and how can we build a community together that allows all community members of the region to thrive through 2045 and beyond. There were 11 workshops that were conducted in 11 different locations throughout the Flagstaff region, all across the area. In those workshops, there were 4 distinct stations that allowed people to convey what they saw as valuable in the Flagstaff region and voice their concerns about the Flagstaff region in a number of different formats. This included things like asset mapping, where people would place essentially pins on the map to determine which areas they identified with Flagstaff as valuable, as well as a talk with your neighbor portion where people had open discussions and were able to find commonalities in their values and that sort of thing. There were over 150 participants in those workshops, as well as concurrently, we ran a visioning survey that asked similar questions to what was being asked in the visioning workshops, which received 126 responses. Conducting these workshops allowed us to see some commonalities in what people valued and what people wanted to see in the regional plan moving forward. Some of the things we heard was an emphasis on natural environments, open space, and sustainability, as well as a desire for multimodal transportation, aside from single occupancy vehicles, a desire for diverse housing options, increased affordability of housing, and able to meet the entire housing needs of the community. a need for diversity, equity, and inclusion, with concerns about things like displacement and making sure the voices of underrepresented populations were heard. Character and heritage preservation, so continuing to emphasize the need to maintain the Flagstaff character that many people have grown to love, as well as recognizing and valuing the history that this place has. And then finally, local and government accountability, a future where Flagstaff and Coconino County are responsive to the needs of the community. The current phase that we're at, the current portion of phase 2 that we're at in the update process is scenario planning. And like I said before, scenario planning is acknowledging that the future is uncertain. And this gives us an opportunity to test different ideas and different policies, different policy directions to see what that might mean for the future based on different uncertainties, to hopefully provide the best outcomes for the region that we can. We conduct this scenario planning process with a modeling program called Urban Footprint. It's a sketch modeling program that allows us to allocate growth to different regions based on different variables and see what outcomes might come from that variable and that growth placement, to see if we can best allocate growth in a way that gives us the outcomes we need for our goals in terms of like vehicle miles traveled, affordable housing, traffic congestions, those sorts of things. So this is the project timeline for scenario planning. We're currently developing scenario themes. That's the portion that we're at now. From the public workshops that we held in the spring, we were able to develop growth ideas based on what we heard from community members. And then we took those growth ideas to our technical advisory group to help refine them. And then we are currently in the process of taking those growth ideas and forming them into scenario themes that will be modeled in the Urban Footprint program and then brought forward to the public for what is called scenario choosing in the fall. After we bring the scenarios to the public, they will have the opportunity to think about what different growth scenarios would mean based on different variables, and ultimately choose a scenario they think would be best for the growth of the region. And that preferred scenario that's selected will ultimately inform how the plan is written. So our technical advisory group is a group of both community and technical experts, and their purpose is to advise the city and community staff and the consulting team on assumptions, data, methods appropriate to engaging the community through scenario planning to ensure for a resilient and equitable future in the Flagstaff region. So the purpose of the technical advisory group is mostly to advise us on how to best test the ideas that we're hearing from the public in our scenario planning in a way that is robust and includes the needs of the entire community, not just certain populations. These meetings with the technical advisory group are available on our regional plan update website. We post the recordings there, and there's also an opportunity for public comment, for viewers to publicly comment based on what they're seeing. Simultaneously with the technical advisory group meeting, we also conducted a significant amount of public engagement through a mapping activity called Face the Future Flagstaff. We had 13 workshops, with 5, possibly 6 of which being in non-traditional formats in places like A New Living, which is a local transitional housing organization. We also hosted an all Spanish version of the activity, as well as we visited multiple educational institutions to conduct the activity with different students of different age levels. This is the game that we use to inform the growth ideas and growth principles that are being used for the scenario theme choosing. The game involved taking a gridded version of the Flagstaff region on a map, and then we took groups of 5 or 6 people and allowed them to place growth in the area, how they saw it would be most effective based on 3 unique variables that were randomly selected, based on different levels of infrastructure funding, climate change levels, and different levels of growth. The group would be tasked with working out certain problems and thinking about how to best place that growth in a way that would be equitable to the community as a whole as they saw fit. From that activity, we were able to generate 60 maps. We had 285 plus participants and representation from 10 community-based organizations. Along with participation, we also had facilitators take notes, as well as we digitized all of the notes and the map data in a way that could be used by our consultants to model the different scenarios. So what we heard during those public meetings, we heard a lot of talk about growth. So we heard general support for mixed use development, a desire to develop more amenities and services across neighborhoods and activity centers, but also a concern with density. And while mixed use development was often desired, it was heavily emphasized that the region should not lose the character that people have come to love in terms of managing density, viewscapes, that sort of thing. There was also a big emphasis on transportation and a general desire for more transit and more multimodal forms of transit across the Flagstaff region. There was heavy emphasis on land protection. So state and federal forest areas and open space is a significant resource that makes Flagstaff attractive to many people. And so that came through quite often in our activities for scenario planning. So getting to scenario themes. As I previously stated, from that scenario planning workshop, Face the Future Flagstaff, and with the help of our technical advisory group, we've developed 6 growth ideas that are meant to inform the modeling of scenarios that we bring to the public in the fall. Multiple growth ideas can be incorporated into one scenario theme, and that is what's currently happening in meetings with the technical advisory group, as well as with our consultants at Cascadia that are doing the modeling process. It's sort of taking these different growth ideas, these 6 growth ideas, and figuring out how to integrate them into different scenarios and different outcomes for the public to take a look at when we finish them up, hopefully in the fall time. Along with the alternative scenarios that are being modeled, the consultant team that we're working with has already finished, for the most part, a business as usual scenario. So this is sort of looking at if trends were to continue as they are now, what would Flagstaff and the Flagstaff region look like in 2045? Some of the outcomes that our consultants have concluded are that things like a housing affordability, if things continue as they have, could possibly get worse. Things like commute time, vehicle miles traveled overall, as well as traffic congestion, could also stagnate or become worse based on our business as usual scenario that has been modeled. And this sort of provides us with a baseline as well as just another avenue to examine the Flagstaff region and another potential future that could exist for us to look at and test new ideas with, along with the alternative scenarios. This is our upcoming events in the phase 2 process. The June 15th webinar has already occurred, but the recording is available on our website, the Flagstaff Regional Plan Update website, as well as the June 26th open house has also occurred. However, it was very similar to the webinar. So if you watch the webinar on our update website, you will get the bulk of the content that was covered in the open house. In July, August time, we'll be having TAG 5 meetings, our technical advisory group meeting number 5, which will be their first opportunity to sort of get a look at the scenario themes that are being developed and critique them and sort of just examine them and determine their viability from their standpoint. And then finally, in September, October time, the scenarios, alternative scenarios will be finalized and brought forth to the public for the scenario choosing process. Then finally, we'll touch on phase 3 of the regional plan update process, which is actually writing the plan. So the writing process really kicks off with the scenario choosing aspect of the scenario planning in phase 2. Once a scenario is chosen, it will then give those writing the plan an opportunity or a starting point to sort of form the foundation of that plan, and it will be informed by that scenario that was chosen by the public. So overseeing the writing process will be a manager-appointed committee where each counselor or board member will provide nominations to the clerk for who should be a part of the committee. So far, I believe there's been 34 nominations, roughly 34 nominations. Once the nominations are finalized, the staff will create a report on the nominations for the city and county managers to potentially determine if there's any gaps in knowledge or discrepancies in demographics or geographics. And then from there, the city and county manager will review the report and invite approximately 20 members to the committee. So the first meeting for the committee will be between August and September of 2023. There will be 1 to 2 meetings per month. And it's not a formal committee, but there will be rules and procedures set to ensure that meetings are advertised, posted, and available to the public. There will be opportunities for public comment at the meetings, as well as the committee will have the opportunity, if they deem it necessary, to provide additional public engagement opportunities. How will we create the plan? So the first step will be determining the rules and procedures for the meetings, set a schedule for the writing process, go over the scenario planning framework, which is the chosen scenario by the public and how that will inform the writing of the plan, as well as set writing objectives. From there, we'll develop a framework for the plan. The first chapter will likely be the land use chapter and will provide a framework for the rest of the regional plan. We'll review future growth illustrations and plan amendment categories, then create other goals and policies to support growth illustration. From there, it'll be the review process. Staff will prepare chapters of the plan and submit them for review. The committee will endorse the draft plan, request a final legal review, and then require public review. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Happy to take questions too, if you have any. Date process. Yes.
Was Planning and Zoning Committee informed by this regional plan?
Yeah, so the main way, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the city commission, at least from our perspective in the city. The same thing is true of the county, but they are the primary commission that kind of will recommend the plan to adoption to city council. So the way that, was your question more about kind of how they're involved in the update or how they use it?
How are they informed? How are their decisions informed by this regional plan? I guess is
Yeah.
the question.
So the way that they use our existing plan is primarily in discretionary development projects. So for example, the hospital is kind of the main one that is floating around at the moment. But for any project that involves like a rezoning, like the new hospital site, they have to complete a finding of conformance with our regional plan. So I can tell you our current regional plan has over 400 goals and policies in it. And no one ever I think maybe we've had one development project that went through it systematically and did every single goal and policy. But most of the time that doesn't happen. And it's largely a narrative about how their project is meeting the goals and policies or some of the goals and policies that are outlined in the currently adopted regional plan. One of the main things, one of the main policy mechanisms that we have in the plan is what Joe referenced. It's called a future growth illustration, which is what really comes out of this scenario planning effort. And that's a graphical representation or a map based representation of how we think the region should grow. So it'll actually be, it'll kind of look like a zoning map. It'll be kind of a colorful map, but it allocates different area types to the region. And so they have to speak to how they're meeting. So for example, the area that they selected for the new hospital would have, I believe that area is one of our identified activity centers in the regional plan, which would have a certain level of a range of density or a mix of uses that is identified in the plan. So they would kind of speak to that in that process. So that's kind of the main way that they use it.
John?
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. Could you just give a quick overview of the scenario choosing process that the public goes through? Like, what does that look like?
We have not fully decided what that will look like, but just in terms of what will be presented to the public. So Joe spoke about the scenario themes that we're developing. So I can tell you what we are likely going to have is the business as usual scenario. And then we're going to have 3 alternative scenarios that will all kind of be policy directive, if you will kind of point us in particular directions in terms of how we want to allocate growth and development going into the future. And so each one of those scenarios will have what we're calling a report card associated with it. So think, maybe 10 to 20 different metrics that you'll get to sort of see a map representation of what that scenario means, and then different metrics in terms of what that will actually mean on the ground for our community. So I think Joe mentioned like housing costs. So that'll be one that we can report on from urban footprint. We can look at carbon emissions. We can look at water use per capita. We can look at some level of like infrastructure costs as well. So there are a lot of different metrics that we can kind of pull out of that modeling software.
How about
And
mode share?
What's that?
Mode share? Is that what?
You can look at mode share, yeah, although what we are likely to do when it comes to the transportation metrics is that we're working with Metro Plan to actually feed our land use elements from the model of the urban footprint model and hopefully run that through some of the models that Metro Plan has as well to get some more robust metrics on things like vehicle miles traveled. So that's an effort we're also undertaking at the moment. But yeah, I believe we can look at mode share through that. So that'll be kind of what the scenario choosing process will look like. I mean, ultimately, how we ask the public to select a scenario, it might look something like, place a green dot on your favorite one. There might be an opportunity to kind of provide more of a written, I'm intrigued by this one because, or I'm concerned by this one because, kind of thing as well. But we haven't determined what exactly that format will look like outside of kind of what we're going to present to the public. So stay posted on that.
Thanks.
So Joe and Jordan, I have a question for you. So going through the presentation, under the visioning insights, what you heard, there's those 6 things. None of them are really surprising, right? And the second one that you might not be surprised we're interested in is multimodal transportation, right? Yeah. Okay, good. And it says future of biking, walking, and transit are viable and competitive options. Fast forward to what we heard at the Face the Future workshop highlights, and it says transportation. It doesn't say multimodal, it just says transportation. Yeah. And it says general support and desire for more transit connections and roads. And obviously absent from that in my mind is pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about the workshops and what was heard and what was not heard?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is, we absolutely heard a desire for multimodal transportation options. We absolutely heard that from some people, but I would say at that phase, it was probably more nuanced. So we heard we heard a lot of people talk about traffic. Yeah. So there is still this mentality that additional vehicular infrastructure will solve traffic, right? So that's one of the things that us as staff try to in any given opportunity, we try to speak to why that is not the case. So we have a lot more research now on induced demand and that kind of thing, as well as how certain land use patterns support the ability of biking and walking or make them more competitive options for people. So they were we definitely heard, I think on the multimodal front, I think probably what we heard more than anything else, and I think it's the easy one that people can latch onto, is infrastructure, better sidewalks, more bike lanes, that kind of thing. I think where at least our hope is that when we bring the results of our scenario modeling back to the public, we can start to hopefully draw the connections between land use and the decision that people make to bike or walk. So obviously there is an infrastructure component there, but it's all well and good having miles of bike lane, but if you're not being connected by anything within close proximity, you're probably still not going to use that mode of transportation over a vehicle, right? So it's, you might have a lovely foots trail that goes from one side of town to the other, but if it's 5 miles long and, goes up and down hills, you might not use that as an option versus, walking down the street to a grocery store, something like that. Did you want to add something, Joe?
I will say, having digitized the maps and digitizing the notes, so having to look over them pretty extensively, more often than not, when people did talk about transportation and did talk about multimodal transportation in general, there was an overwhelming, not overwhelming, but there was definitely a majority of people that were concerned about things like public transportation and foots trails and that sort of thing than they were about adding roads. So I will say that there was general consensus, like it said, I think it said in the presentation, general consensus about increased connectivity. And that was a big emphasis for people, in not necessarily from the standpoint of building more roads, but more from connectivity for people that don't necessarily have access to cars.
Copy. Thank you.
I just want to emphasize that I think connectivity in this town is probably one of the biggest barriers to using other modes of transportation.
Yep.
If I can get to somewhere on a gravel path or a dirt path easily, then I'll choose that over a vehicle. So I think connectivity, I'll reiterate, I feel like connectivity is one of the bigger issues.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily big infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I think that shined through a lot during the scenario planning workshops, the Face the Future. There was not only was there desire for that connectivity, there was also a desire for people not having to travel as far in general to get to like basic needs in terms of mixed use development and things like that, which in turn could increase that ability to use multimodal transportation if you don't have to go all the way across town to get to something.
Agreed, yeah. How easy is it to get to the grocery store? How easy is it to get to somebody's office,
Yeah.
So Joe, I have a question. It's probably for you about the digitized map data.
Yeah.
And so the map that you have on the screen on the presentation is obviously like the whole planning area. And so when I look at it, and specifically from the Forest Service perspective, all the no growth lines are either mostly like on National Forest or National Park Service monuments or Observatory Mesa, a city open space parcel, areas that are obviously, maybe not to everyone, but pretty obviously not going to be developed. Did you drill down, or were the maps set up so that folks could like look at really the urban area of Flagstaff and draw those lines on a finer scale? And if so, is that data available to view?
I will say that one of the major gripes that people had when we were doing the workshop was that there wasn't you couldn't really see the Flagstaff area city itself in a very refined way. It wasn't blown up anywhere. So
Yeah.
that was something to think about in terms of like no growth. Sometimes people would draw small circles, and that's another thing with digitizing the no growth areas. It wasn't confined to specific areas in the mapping software. It was the entire grid square would be labeled as a no growth area if there was a line drawn in it. So it made it a little more difficult to designate specific sort of small areas as no growth. However, that was kind of where the facilitator notes would come in to sort of inform the map. So we would have a facilitator and a note taker at each map. So say somebody placed a no growth token, say, for example, somewhere in East Flagstaff, they would, while the grid square would say this entire area is no growth, ideally the facilitation note taker was writing exactly where they intended the no growth, which was also digitized and sent to our consultants to inform their scenario modeling, not just the maps.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee for Joe and Jordan while we've got them? No, I think we're good. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. It was really helpful. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, moving on through more old business. Safe Streets for All grant application. Martin?
Was submitted last Friday. So do you want me to, I think I've got an image here of, what the project components were.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
If you have it handy,
I do, I'll go ahead and share it.
please.
Okay. So basic components are we're building a separated bike lane along the length of Butler from Milton to Sawmill. Protected intersections are going in at Beaver, San Francisco, and Sawmill, and they would complement the one that's being built at Lone Tree, or that will be built at Lone Tree as part of the overpass project. So 4 protected intersections along the corridor. One new enhanced crossing at O'Leary Street, and upgrades to the one at Humphreys. And I think generally the upgrades to the one at Humphreys will include putting the signal on a mast arm, so it's more out over the street and more visible for drivers. In a lot of places, there's room to add a parkway and potentially street trees and even to widen the sidewalk. It's kind of hard to tell when you go down the corridor now. When the city originally built Butler, there was 10 feet of landscaping in a lot of areas that is part of the right of way. And it was probably originally, you could consider it landscaping. Now it's just mostly giant juniper bushes. So we're thinking that we can use a lot of that land as part of our configuration to give a little bit more space. And that's where we get the opportunity for potentially a parkway. And I'll show you, here's an illustration of it. So the orange is the entire corridor. What's in blue here is NAU. We have Milton on the west and Sawmill on the east. And the new protected intersections are these blue squares. So Beaver, San Francisco, and Sawmill. This is Lone Tree, and generally the alignment of the Lone Tree overpass, and there's another protected intersection there. And then our enhanced crossings at O'Leary and Humphrey. So pretty good spacing along the corridor for crossings between the intersections and the dedicated crossings to make Butler a little bit less of a barrier. And then for kind of an illustration of a cross section, the top image shows what Butler looks like now, but without the curb barriers or delineators between the bike lane and the travel lane. So here we have a median, a couple of travel lanes, a bike lane and street, and then a 5-foot sidewalk. And where we have room, we'll keep the travel lanes, but move the bike lane adjacent to the sidewalk and then provide space for a parkway. And again, this shows that 10 feet, and so these dimensions work out. That we won't be able to do this in every place. There's a few places where I think we'll have to skip the parkway, basically, and the bike lane and sidewalk combo will be next to the curb, but we'll work through that in design. So the total project cost, based on our preliminary estimates, is $12 million. The grant that we submitted for is 9.6, which leaves 2.4 for the city to come up with for our local match. So we will be asking you for, we'll be passing a hat later in the evening to help raise it. Actually, I guess it's virtually, either it's going to be virtually or just Nancy and I are going to
Send us your Venmo, Martin.
Perfect. Actually, we have the Downtown Mile project, which is a $32 million federal grant, also has a local match. And ADOT came through and gave the city $3 million to help with our local match. And so the $3 million that was liberated as a result of that is going to cover the match for this grant, should we get it.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we submitted it in last Friday, so we could go tomorrow, and we won't find out until December if we've gotten it or not. So no instant gratification or disappointment. Yes. So I think that's all we had for that one.
Yep.
But I'm happy to answer any questions or hear your comments.
I will just offer, if you go back in Google Street View, it goes back for Butler to 2009. And it's interesting to see Butler has always been ugly, but it's interesting to see the development of some of the parcels over the last 14 years. But Butler itself has not changed very much at all. It's been bad from the beginning. That's my editorial comment on that one. Any other comments or questions for Martin about that from the committee?
I don't know if this is a question, but I was driving by Butler today and I saw that the barriers were either getting replaced or picked up. So I didn't know if there's any maintenance going on that you guys knew about, or if this the conversion starting before the grant. I didn't know. I just wanted to ask about that.
Alexis, good question. We presented a follow-up evaluation to City Council in June on the pilot bike lanes. And there are still some ongoing maintenance issues, especially with the winter that we had, as well as some barriers being hit by vehicles. So we went back to Transportation Commission and the Bicycle Advisory Committee and found a way to remove some of the barriers that were problematic, either from a standpoint of getting hit by vehicles or of trapping ice and snow and being difficult to maintain. Especially in areas where there are buildings close on the north side and shading is an issue. And then finally to open up where there were long stretches of barriers, to open up a little bit so bikes could get out into the lane if they needed to in more locations. Public Works also weighed in, and the council weighed in when we presented and asked that most of the barriers along the south side of Butler from Lone Tree to Sawmill be removed. So there are some remaining barriers on the north side, but all of them are going to be, I think that work is done actually as of today, that all the barriers on the south side were removed. So Alexis, that's a long answer to your question, but that is not part of this grant or the conversion. It was kind of fixing or attempting to fix and make the barriers along there now more functional. The other thing that I think happened today is a double bike lane line was striped in the places where there isn't a barrier. And in fact, I think the buffered bike lane extended all the way to Ponderosa Parkway. If you were out there, did you happen to notice that, or can you confirm that?
I don't know if I saw that happening. If you're asking me, I was on where Drury Hotel is. just by that intersection, and I just saw
Okay.
something along there. But I remember talking about that last month. Rings a bell now. So, but no, I didn't head up there.
Yeah, I think we have a conversation here about it
I
as
think we
well.
did. Yeah. At least about like the berms that happen over winter.
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna ride that way home tonight, just see what it looks
Yeah,
like.
no, I'm curious.
Yeah.
All right, if no other questions or comments, move on to our next item of old business. Martin, amendments to ATMP.
Yes, you'll recall that we asked you to consider some minor amendments that would help support our grant application for the Safe Streets for All for the agenda item that's above it.
Yep.
That went before Bike Advisory and Pet Advisory in June, as well as the Transportation Commission. On July 3rd, we took it to the City Council and they approved Resolution 2023-41. And I provided you with a copy of the amended ATMP for your reference, amusement, future use. And I think we presented the amendments and described them and then kind of gave them really the same information that I just gave you on what the grant project will look like. And that they were excited to see that and supportive of that project and had no issues really with the proposed amendments.
Sorry. All right.
Oh, I did, Mr. Chair, I did forget to mention that there was a letter of support. The PAC voted at the June meeting to support the project and the grant. And so we drafted a letter of support that you were kind enough to sign, and I provided that in the packet if anybody has any questions about that.
Yep. Thanks for the ghostwriting support there, Martin.
Oh, don't thank me. That was all AI.
So is my signature, so we're good.
No humans touched that letter.
Who knows what it really said? Okay, moving through the next item, safe sidewalks discussion.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to this. I will say that on June 13th, city staff made a presentation to the council on our snow operations. And the first part of the presentation was streets, talking about our practices and policies, et cetera, for snow removal. And then the second part was parks, talking about their role in snow removal. And streets, of course, does all the public streets in town. And parks does things like sidewalks, public sidewalks that are the responsibility of the city. So, the adjoining property owner is responsible for removing snow from sidewalks adjacent to their property. So where the city owns sidewalks, like in front of City Hall, for example, the city has to do those. And so Parks is responsible for doing that. They also do city parking lots and foot trails and a handful of other things as well. So streets describe their operations manual. They review that and update it every year. And it generally just describes what their practices are for removing snow. And they have priorities. They have priority routes. They indicated that they do look to other communities for best practices. Parks, for their part, has something similar. They have a list of priorities, what they get to first, and kind of a standard procedure. And from that, the council went into a discussion about snow removal, and they talked a little bit about the issues that streets encounters when people park in the street, and that got a little bit sideways for a bit. I don't know, was anybody there?
No.
Council meeting? Okay. So they talked about how we might enforce better so there aren't cars blocking snowplows on residential streets. They also talked a little bit about equity and who this affects and kind of what the ultimate consequences of snow removal are. And I think they indicated a real level of support for moving the city forward. One thing they talked about a bit was providing better information. So with GIS and other opportunities, we're not really that far, and I think some communities already do this, provide almost real-time information about what's been plowed and what hasn't been plowed and what to expect. And I think I've seen other communities that have pretty robust snow operations plans, and when they have that information available, really anybody in the community can look online and kind of know when to expect different things to be cleared. For example, it would be really handy to know when the Route 66 path is cleared of snow after an event. And I think if we had some of that information and we're able to feed some of the real-time information, that anybody would be able to see that, so they know, first they know when to expect it. So by the city's policy, maybe it's 3 days, maybe it's 2 days after the event that will be cleared. And then they can actually see when it does get cleared, and then know that it's available to walk or bike on. And just having that level of information, I think would go a long ways for people who want to continue walking or biking or taking transit through snow events. So we're still working with Commission on Inclusion and Adaptive Living. I think we talked about it a little bit last time, but we'll continue to collect information, and we've got a lot of information. We just kind of need to summarize it and get it on paper and back in front of the groups. So we'll continue. We'll also reach out to Public Works and Parks and kind of coordinate with them and find out what their practices are and what best practices are from other communities, and then develop a list of recommendations. So still moving forward.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Martin. Moving into new business, the juicy stuff, pedestrian and bicycle crash data report.
So I provided a copy of that in your packet. And if you, see if I can find it, if you'll indulge me, I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. Tell me if it gets too small to, is that still readable?
Let's see. Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna go through some of the highlights of it. And I've got them indicated by a yellow mark on the bottom of the page, so I know when to stop to look at it. But feel free to jump in and interrupt if you have questions or comments. So we originally did a report like this in advance of the Active Transportation Master Plan and used it for background information. That report covered the years 2009 to 2018, so 10 years worth of data. We updated it recently, the version that you see now, in support of both the amendments to the ATMP and the grant applications. They wanted to see that we had the crash data analyzed with the most recent data. So we did that with 5 years of data from 2017 to 2021. That's what this report is. So really, we did that. It was time to update it, and we did it to support that grant. We'll probably do it again, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years. But as we go through it, if there's information that kind of strikes you, it would be as interesting, or maybe to dive deeper into the analysis, feel free to express that, because I think next time we may have a little bit more time to get into the data a little bit more. And I'll show you some examples as we go through of how we might do a deeper dive into some of the information. And then, of course, we're still working on different ways to use the information to improve things. One idea might be working with Public Works, the police department, the fire department, the county, other places, and kind of review the information, compare it to what we're actually seeing or what the police are actually seeing in the field, and then kind of just that by virtue of sharing that information, be able to come up with different ways of tackling it. For example, when the police department sees patterns of crashes, they may do targeted enforcement to address those crashes, and they've done that over the years. So let's kind of go through. And I hope they show up. I'm looking for yellow marks across the bottom. And sorry if this induces seasickness in anyone.
There's yellow.
All right, there's the yellow. So our data actually goes all the way back to 2001, but again, for this report, we just considered the last 5 years. In those 5 years, there were a total of 130 pedestrian crashes and 152 bike crashes, and that works out to an average of 26 ped crashes and 30 bike crashes annually. And as a percentage, they're both between 1% and 2% as a percentage of all crashes. And then you can see if we look at trend lines, from year to year, they kind of bounce around, but generally it feels like they're a little bit on a decline.
Yeah.
And it feels generally consistent across peds, bikes, and vehicles. So whatever is resulting in those bumps or in that general decline is universal across those modes.
So Martin, can you scroll up again for a second? So I'm just curious on your opinion, your experience here over many years. So that bicycle crashes per year, yeah, it's trending down, but in 2015, it just dropped and it kind of halved and it stayed at that level for 6 years, basically. I was wondering if you just had any idea of what may have changed in Flagstaff in 2015, if anything, because it's just a pretty significant decrease that has been maintained over time.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I'm not sure I can explain it.
Yeah.
One thing that we could do, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how we would do it, but one piece of information that we're missing is comparison to participation rates.
Mm-hmm.
So how many people, what's the crash rate? We report on total numbers, but we don't know the rate because we don't always have good information on how many people are walking and biking, either citywide or at particular locations. I do know that in a general sense, participation in bicycling has declined over the last few years. And that may predate 2015, but that may partially explain the drop in crashes is because fewer people are biking.
Gotcha.
I will point out one other interesting thing along those lines. You can see in 2020, for reasons that we remember very well, both vehicular crashes and bicycle crashes dropped, but pedestrian crashes really didn't. Noticeably for that year.
Yeah, it's interesting because both bikes and vehicles basically halved and pedestrian crashes didn't change. I was curious about that also, but a mystery.
Yeah, and I think if you follow like national news, I think there's been a lot of stories recently about how pedestrian crashes have actually been going up.
Yeah.
It didn't abate at all during the pandemic.
Yep.
I recently read, I think like today, that it's at a 40-year high, reported like 8 days ago. It's like a 15% increase in the nation. It's like insane. This is for just pedestrians too, but yeah.
So I just want to catch up with a few notes. All right, the next two things are, these are crash concentration. So we do a heat map. These are pedestrian crashes. Not surprisingly, a concentration in the central area. This would be Milton, so a few along there. And then 4th Street has always been kind of a hotspot for pedestrian crashes as well. And then we can compare that to bicycle crashes. Not so pronounced on 4th Street, but more pronounced really in the central area. And if we'll see other maps later, but really Milton and Butler are kind of the two corridors. This is interesting and concerning. It's really the section of Butler by Ponderosa, between Ponderosa and Babbitt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my guess is that we have, there's a lot of driveways and a lot of activity there. And so probably conflicts with turning vehicles and bikes either along that trail or in the bike lane.
Martin, can you go back up to the pedestrian crashes? Sorry. I'm again going to ask you to interpret this for me, but obviously the downtown and the Milton I won't say make sense, but we understand it. What is it about Fourth that leads to those pedestrian crashes, but not bikes? I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Just from observation, I've seen is that before the lighted pedestrian walkways across Fourth,
Yeah.
randomly crossed wherever.
People just making a run for it. Yeah.
To the west are headed to the businesses to the east.
Yeah. Kind of up by the library. That's what I was
Even
thinking.
farther, even farther down.
Yeah.
I see people but now there's two major where they
Those
can
beacons.
push a button and there's red lights.
Yep.
So that there may be two lines of inquiry suggested there. One is to look at the pedestrian crashes along 4th Street and see if they're generally crossing crashes, if it's where the pedestrian is crossing, as we're theorizing. And then second is we could look at the occurrence of that before the pedestrian beacons went in and after to see if it made a noticeable difference.
Yeah.
I don't remember this data goes from 2017 to 2021, and I don't remember when those were installed, if it was before that.
I think it was around 19 or 20 maybe.
That's what I was thinking. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I worked at CCC for those years, and I remember all of a sudden people had a lighted crosswalk.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you think it was in the middle of that time period? Yeah.
It feels like that. But the heat map is interesting because there's one spot where one of the new lighted crosswalks is up by the library and the NCCC campus.
Yep.
And then the other one is down on the intersection with 66, which makes a lot of sense. You've got 4 lanes in both directions.
Turn lanes. Yeah, that's a bad intersection.
A rough intersection to cross.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's kind of the kind of detail that I think is really the next step in reports like this is to find out where we see these things, like what's the cause or what's going on in the ground. And then of course, ideally the follow-up to that would be fix it.
Right.
Like implement countermeasures to address those crashes once you understand why they're happening.
And this was 17 to 21. Be interesting. And what's that little red spot? Is that on Milton?
And for bike crashes or pedestrian? Yeah, this right here.
Pedestrians, yeah.
You see the pointer?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it appears on both. That one I'm less sure of, but it's the intersection of Milton and Reardon.
Oh.
So one possible explanation is a whole lot more pedestrians and bicyclists going through because of that student housing. I forget the name of it on West Route 66, just a few blocks away. I'm guessing that their main route into campus would have to use Reardon. They would have to cross at Reardon.
That's another 4 lanes in both directions. And cars don't always give right away to people in the crosswalk.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here in Flagstaff?
You're talking crazy.
No, at that intersection.
So that's would be another good one to pursue, exactly what's happening at that corner, like what types of crashes there are. Is it as we theorize related to increased activity?
Yeah.
And we could tell, are they like right turn crashes, for example, vehicles turning right on red? Are they other types of crashes?
Hey, Martin, so how do we get that kind of information? You know, looking at these heat maps, it's really cool. It looks like a good field trip to just go stand at an intersection for a while and see what's happening. But is there some formal method to understand like why these particular areas are having issues?
Yeah, generally the first thing we would do is just pull up those crashes and do a little bit deeper analysis of what the nature of those crashes. So collect a little bit more information. When we do this citywide, like for this report, we're just kind of touching on the surface, but we identify where some of those areas are. And there's enough information in that data that we could get a better understanding of why those crashes are occurring, or what type of crashes there are, or what's happening. So that gets you a little bit further along. I think if we're really serious at that point, you can do what's called a road safety assessment or a road safety audit, where you do a really deep dive, including field visits to the site and actually see what's going on. Witness. And typically they do that during the day when it's busy. They also do it at night if nighttime crashes are a concern, or if there's a difference there. And that gets you to a point where once you understand what's happening on the ground, again, you can devise appropriate countermeasures.
That Martin, that second level of analysis that you're talking about, not the actual audit where you're out there. I don't imagine that you've got a lot of free time to be doing that. Is that something that your new employee could do, or that we could find you an intern? Because I think that all of us are pretty interested in a little bit more information on some of these. And like on Fourth, is it people streaking across the road, or is it driveway crashes, and then, yeah, as Nancy said, how has it been impacted by those beacons? Like who could actually get some of that for us?
I think we have a couple of options, and NAU has, when they have students that do projects like this, either in planning or in engineering.
We just assigned it to Alexis.
So it's really funny. Today, I actually just got a position as an NAU undergrad researcher for studying like bicyclist comfortability. And so I could talk to Dr. Gerke about this and see what we can do. I'm not an engineering major, but we probably have connections, and I'm down to learn. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Dr. Gerke and Dr. Smaglik and Dr. Russo are the three that might be able to help us. And I think this might be a real valuable student project. I think they would learn a lot from it.
I'd be very down. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you help us with that, Alexis?
Yes, I want a follow-up email with that. I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
I'd volunteer to go stand on a corner too and watch.
Why not? Sounds fun when the sun's out.
Okay, you want to plow forward? We're a bit short on time.
Just a quick question, Mark. Where does this data come from? The police department? Incident reports from the PD?
Yes, they send all their incident reports to the state, who compiles it and makes it available back to us in a form that's a little bit easier for us to manage. Like it includes geographic information, for example, so we can start to map it.
And time of day probably would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, and it all starts with the crash reports that are filled out by Flag PD.
Yeah. Alexis, if you need any help, I'm willing to participate.
Yes, I like that. I think we can have like a group follow-up email about that and plan something.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
It's a great idea.
I just have interest in it because I'm a retired nurse and I worked at FMC for 17 and a half years, and I saw these people. I saw them when they came in, and it was some of them were pretty remarkable.
Yeah, ultimately they're not dots on a map, they're people.
Right.
All right, this is a table of injury severity. It's classified into 5 different levels, ranging from fatal crashes to no injury, also called property damage only. And this graph, I think the main point is that pedestrians and bicyclists in crashes are much more likely to be injured. Which stands to reason, where there's a reason that we call them vulnerable users. This shows crashes by injury severity placed on a map. What strikes me, this is the pedestrians, and the green squares are fatalities. What strikes me is that you look at the fatalities and they are almost all on the east side, and particularly clustered around the mall area. So again, I think to me, this suggests another line of inquiry into why, what is the nature of those crashes? Is there a reason that they're geographically concentrated in that part of town?
What's that one street real quick? I saw there those three green dots in a row on the upper part of the map over on the east side. Yeah. Does anyone know what street that is? I don't know east that well. I don't know.
Highway 89.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's 89. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, right. And the mall is right across, like between
That's like right.
Yeah, like basically to where above where the cursor is the mall.
Okay.
And that third one on the right is the intersection outside my office. Going over to the Safeway. Yeah.
These tables show serious injury crashes and fatal crashes by year, broken down into pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle. And we typically have, we average 2.8 pedestrian fatalities, 3.3 vehicle fatalities, and then bicyclists are a little bit more intermittent. So for example, we had one in 2012, and then we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years before we had another. And then we had one in 2019 and 2 in 2021. And you can see pedestrian crashes fatalities are a little bit more consistent. That shows it graphically. This shows if we consider just serious injury and fatal crashes, if you're a pedestrian in a crash, 28.5% result in serious injury or fatality. And if you look at just fatalities by crash type, pedestrian crashes are more than a third of all fatalities, all traffic fatalities. Bicyclists are about 10%, and then you can see single vehicle and multiple vehicle are the remainder. But I mean, I think the line of inquiry would be to see if that tracks with other communities, or if we are high or low in that regard. I'm guessing it probably tracks, but it would be worth looking into. That's the other thing we don't really have is a good comparison always to other communities. Don't always collect the same level of data that we have here. Yeah. But it would be interesting because then you can see, is that something that is typical in other communities, or do we stand out in some way? And then of course that would lead to other lines of inquiry.
Martin, I've got folks knocking on my door, so I'm gonna have to drop off.
Okay.
Can we, I know Alexis raised her hand, can we make sure we capture this as a follow-up on the crash data as an action item for the committee?
Absolutely.
And we can figure out how we want to proceed so that we're not trying to get Alexis to do all the work. And now I'll know if I'm driving or walking around town, when I see John just lurking on a corner, I'll know why.
With a clipboard.
John and a clipboard. Yeah. So I apologize that I got to run out early here, folks. Martin, can you bring us home for the rest of the meeting?
I will. Actually, we lose our quorum, so it's the rest of the meeting is short.
But you don't have any decisions to make, so you could just keep chatting. I apologize for having to go, folks. I'll see you hopefully next month. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks, Matt.
See you, Matt.
Yeah, technically, we're not even allowed to keep chatting. Oh, there's a kitty. Does a cat keep our quorum?
Yeah. He's our
Double
mascot.
Yeah.
Okay, so given a loss of our quorum, we'll adjourn the meeting at 5:46. But
Okay.
we'll pick it up next month.
All right.
What's your kitty's name? Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. His name's Captain.
Captain.
Captain. He's a captain. He'd love to join. He tried applying. No.
Looks interested.
Yeah. Yeah. He wants some pets. Yeah. Or he wants to go outside. It's so hot in here though. I'm trying to like keep all the windows and doors shut.
Yeah.
Cools down. So he can go outside then. Yeah.
Can you share, or do we have everybody's email that's on this committee?
Yeah, it should be like in the notices that you get for the agenda.
Got it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other ones, but the main 2 lines should be all the committee members.
Great.
And yeah, I'm a business major, so I don't know much about when it comes to this type of analysis. But once again, I'm very down to learn and I'm very down to be involved. So I'm excited about that.
What's your assignment specifically?
So it's a research project. It's identifying levels of comfortability with bicyclists with multimodal infrastructure, like transportation infrastructure. Long sentence, but yeah, that's like the research topic. And our first goal is just identifying specifically in different communities, just identifying bicyclists and yeah, just the diversity within communities.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want to talk, just drop me a line or send an email, and
Yeah.
if you ever have questions or want to chat about it, or
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
I used to work in the trauma department at the hospital, and so my job as the injury prevention person was to analyze this stuff. And so
Yeah.
I know what data points to look for, time of day and
Yeah.
whether there was impairment of any kind. if
Yeah.
we know that, or not. And
Yeah. Finding those patterns.
mhm.
Yeah.
So if you need somebody to look over data, I'm pretty
Yeah.
good at
you're an
stuff.
epidemiologist.
It was kind of epidemiological, because we had to analyze our data. Who are our trauma patients? And we divide them up into critical trauma, guarded, and then minor. And all that data we share with the US government by hospital codes. So when the patient's gone and their chart is finally sent to medical records, they're coded. Like what code did their injury or illness fall under? So all that if we share that with the federal government, primary Department of Health Services and CDC, they give the hospital $3 million a year to be a trauma center. And so, anyway, so I did the quality stuff, like, were we doing all the things on time that we needed to do for these types of patients? The surgeon has to be at the bedside within 15 minutes of a critical trauma's arrival. That's just one data point. And so my job was to tease through all that, read charts basically.
Yeah.
See, are we meeting the goals of being a trauma center?
Yeah.
So anyway.
So that's an interesting job. That's really cool though.
It
It's a
was
lot.
So through that, we identified problem areas in town.
Yeah.
And like ATV wrecks were right almost at the top.
Yeah.
And the places where people wrecked, we would map out and send people out there on holiday weekends and talk to them about
Safety.
Yeah, and a lot of it, unfortunately, a lot of the wrecks were kids that weren't old and weren't supposed to be driving an ATV.
Yeah.
And their parents had just put them on and let them go,
Interesting.
thinking it was benign, but
Brought it home.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then ice. It's a huge thing in town. When the freeze thaw cycle gets going, oh my gosh, the injuries go way up.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
That and lumbar compression fractures from sledding.
Oh my God.
When the freeze thaw gets going, you can just see the pattern and
Wow.
yeah, it was really interesting.
So some years ago, I was outside, early morning after it had snowed. And I'm shoveling my driveway. My neighbor comes over and says, if when you finish, if you're not too busy, could you take me to the emergency room? And I said, okay, what happened? She said, I think I broke both my wrists. And I go, okay, how about I take you now?
Oh my God.
She had slipped and fallen backwards and caught herself on both her wrists. It did indeed break both her wrists.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The
She
ice,
didn't inconvenience you.
yeah, if anybody wants to know what's one of the dangerous things in Flagstaff, it's ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, like, she had a nice winter coat, and when she got to the emergency room, the attending physician was trying to take it off, and it was causing her some discomfort. He said, I can cut it off. She goes, nope, I'm fine.
I feel that. I really feel that. I have my one winter coat. Like, nope, I'll take my time.
Oh, they have really bad scissors and yeah, we'll cut clothes off if they're really critically injured or.
Yeah.
There's no one to sew it back together.
Oh, no. Anyway, I digress.
Alrighty, guys. Well, I'll see you in like a month, or
Yeah.
we'll follow up an email.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys soon. All right. Well, have a great day.
Alexis,
Bye.
say goodbye to Captain for us.
Yeah.